The night before Arnold was to become California's moral compass, his wife vanished. And when she came back, she didn't ask for justice. She rewrote history. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Autumn 1996. California slept under the glow of political anticipation. Inside the grand Biltmore Hotel, preparations were underway for what many believed would be the rebirth of American conservatism, with a man no one dared call anything but a legend at its center. Arnold stood on the 15th floor, surrounded by advisors, speechwriters, and security. The suite smelled of confidence. Fresh print, press suits, handshakes rehearsed in silence. It was hours before he would step onto the ballroom stage and announce his long-awaited run for governor of California. Every headline was ready, every spotlight already aligned. But at 7:14 p.m., everything paused. A whisper, just one sentence, spoken low by his assistant as he adjusted his cufflink near the mirror. Maria's gone. The room didn't react at first. Not until Arnold turned away from the mirror and froze mid-breath. Gone? She left the suite. No security. No note. We've checked every camera in the hallway. Nothing. He didn't speak. His jaw tensed slightly, the only sign of movement. Then he calmly reached for his speech folder and walked to the table. No panic. Not yet. Not when the entire country was watching. By 8:05 p.m., the hotel security team had already swept the building. No sign of Maria Shriver, former journalist, public figure, and the woman long called the conscience behind the man. The press still had no idea. And for the next 45 minutes, neither did the public. At 9 p.m. sharp, Arnold walked onto stage. Cameras flashed like firecrackers. He looked taller than ever, his expression perfectly balanced between resolve and humility. He opened his speech with a quiet gravity. I have spent my life preparing for moments like this. But tonight is not about me. It's about all of us. About rebuilding trust. About doing what's right when it's hard. The applause was thunderous. Only Maria wasn't there to hear it. The country went to sleep on a high. The candidate had arrived. But behind closed doors, the FBI had already received a formal request for a missing persons investigation. Not from Arnold, but from one of Maria's cousins, concerned by a voicemail Maria left earlier that afternoon. Just 8 words. If anything happens to me, start with him. No one heard that voicemail until the next morning. The next day, news broke that Maria Shriver had not been seen in 18 hours. The governor's team called it a private family concern, but the media turned faster than anyone expected. Not because she was missing, but because Arnold hadn't said a word about it during the biggest moment of his political life. Within 24 hours, speculation filled every screen. Was she taken? Did she leave? And why did the man so revered for strength and transparency say nothing? Then someone found an old interview from 1989. Maria, seated next to Arnold, smiled politely as a reporter asked about their marriage. How do you manage such a powerful man? She answered softly, You don't manage Arnold. You endure him. It resurfaced like a crack in glass, thin but spreading. A reminder that for all the speeches, the medals, and the movies, there had always been one person who saw the man behind the myth. The next night, Arnold canceled his next public appearance. Officially, it was to spend time with family. But Maria's family said they hadn't heard from her since 3:30 p.m. the day before. A line from her last column as a journalist started trending. I know what silence sounds like when it's chosen. The world had watched Arnold speak with perfect composure. But now, it began to wonder what it meant when the woman who had stood beside him for 15 years disappeared. And he stood taller, not with worry, but with stillness. In the days that followed, the silence thickened. Maria's name appeared on every news ticker, but no one had seen her, heard from her, or come forward with a sighting. The only image available was an old press photo, grainy and formal, from her last public event 3 years prior, her expression distant, almost blurred with disinterest. Behind closed doors, investigators combed through timelines, flight records, security feeds. But there was something strange. Maria hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't taken her passport. There was no credit card activity, No phone pings, no notes. She had simply vanished. The only clue was a printed email draft found in her personal folder, time-stamped 6 days before the disappearance. The subject line was blank. The body held just 2 sentences. If you think I don't know, you're wrong. If you think I'll stay silent, you're even more wrong. The draft wasn't sent, but it was enough. Flashbacks began to surface. Old interviews, unguarded moments, distant smiles. In 1986, Maria had met Arnold at a charity gala in Los Angeles. At the time, she was a respected journalist, a rising figure in the Kennedy political dynasty. He was already a household name, a global icon with muscles and charm, still learning how to soften his accent in interviews. They married in 1987, in what the press called a fusion of Hollywood and American royalty. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, but from within, something else was happening, something Maria had never spoken about, but had always hinted at. In 1990, just days after Arnold's blockbuster premiere, she canceled her return to CBS News. The network cited family commitments. Friends whispered it was something else. She never went back. By 1994, Maria stopped appearing at his film premieres. She didn't walk red carpets. She no longer stood beside him at public events. The campaign announcement in 1996 was supposed to be different. Her return to the spotlight. But now, her absence was louder than any speech. Inside the campaign office, Arnold reviewed footage from past interviews. One clip showed Maria being asked about being married to someone so adored. "How do you manage a man who's seen as untouchable?" the host asked. She laughed once, then paused. "You don't manage someone like that. You learn which parts of yourself can survive being invisible." That interview had aired in 1992. No one noticed it then. They noticed it now. Arnold said nothing publicly, but people close to him described him as focused, detached, like a man playing a part that had been rehearsed so well. He no longer remembered where the character ended. In private, he watched the walls close in. He began calling friends he hadn't spoken to in years, not to ask for help, just to talk. But conversations drifted into questions. Questions he didn't want to answer. Did she know? Did she see it all? Because in truth, Maria had always known. She had been the one who studied his silences, who edited his speeches before anyone else read them. She knew which pauses were real and which were inserted for applause. She had watched him construct the perfect image for America. And now, America was watching it collapse. When asked about their marriage over the years, Arnold often repeated the same phrase. "She's my foundation. She keeps me grounded." But foundations don't vanish overnight. They erode, quietly, over time. And when they go, everything standing on them trembles. 3 days after Maria vanished, the questions stopped being whispered. They became headlines. The press, which once tread lightly around the marriage of America's action hero and his political heiress wife, had changed tone. Now, every moment of silence from Arnold was seen not as composure, but as calculation. A local affiliate aired an early morning segment showing footage of Maria walking alone into a bookstore a week prior. She looked calm. Alone, she purchased a single title, The Art of Leaving Quietly. The irony wasn't missed. Neither was the surveillance footage the FBI couldn't explain. An entire wing of the hotel's hallway camera system had gone black for exactly 92 minutes on the night she disappeared. And in the middle of that window, Maria had walked out, or someone had walked her out. The investigation shifted. No longer a missing persons case, but something deeper, structured, unnerving. The media began to ask not where Maria had gone, but what she had left behind. That's when they found the key. It wasn't discovered in a safe or hidden folder. It was taped, plainly and quietly, to the back of a utility invoice from the Schwarzenegger estate. A code, 6 digits. Investigators matched it to a padlock on a narrow door behind the garage of Arnold's Los Angeles property. No one, not even longtime staff, knew it existed. What lay beyond was a small room, no more than 10 feet across. Furnished, clean, but intimate in a way that did not match the rest of the property. There were no family pictures, only a lamp, a chair, a folded blanket, and a locked drawer. Inside a box. Inside that, dozens of handwritten notes, some dating back 3 years. None of them in Maria's handwriting. The name that appeared again and again in those notes was Mildred. When questioned, Arnold's lawyer said nothing. But by evening, a leak hit the wires. Mildred Baena, a longtime housekeeper for Schwarzenegger estate, had been quietly employed and reemployed under different aliases since 1995. Her pay had increased incrementally with every election cycle. She had no official address listed, but financial records showed tuition payments made on her behalf to a private school in the valley for a child. By the time the sun rose, the country knew. Arnold, the man who had preached family values, who stood beside his children at every campaign launch, had been supporting another child in secret. The name of the child was withheld. But it didn't matter. The myth had cracked. During a press conference that afternoon, a reporter asked directly, "Governor, did your wife know?" Arnold didn't answer. He looked down at the podium, blinked, then said only, "I have nothing to say on this matter." But the silence spoke louder than any confession. The backlash was instant. Late night shows rewrote their scripts. Sunday talk shows canceled scheduled guests. Op-eds flooded the presses. Even his longtime allies in politics began releasing vague statements about family matters being personal, but truth being essential. A digital petition titled "Withdraw with Dignity" gained 100,000 signatures in 48 hours. And still, Maria had not appeared. Some believed she had orchestrated the exposure. Others believed she was truly in hiding, humiliated, broken. But those closest to her said something else entirely. "She's not hiding," one friend told a reporter. "She's watching." Because the most chilling part wasn't what had been revealed. It was the timing. Every piece of the leak, Mildred's name, the secret room, the tuition payments, had been perfectly placed. Released not all at once, but methodically, like chapters in a story someone had written long ago and waited patiently to publish. By the fifth day, the narrative had flipped completely. Arnold was no longer the strong, silent symbol. He was a man cornered by a truth that had waited too long to surface. In the quiet space behind the garage, one note was left on the floor, unfolded. It read, "You taught me how to stay silent. Now I'll teach you what silence costs." There was no signature. For the public, it didn't matter who wrote it, but Arnold knew the handwriting. And he knew Maria had never needed to scream. She only needed people to listen when he stopped talking. Behind closed doors, his team scrambled. They suggested a sit-down interview, a heartfelt statement, a televised apology. He refused. "I don't want to defend myself," he reportedly said. "I want to disappear before she finishes what I helped her start." But it was already too late. He had once told a journalist off camera that Maria was the only person who understood the real him. She knew where the cracks were. She just never pushed. Now, the world was stepping inside those cracks and finding entire rooms he'd kept hidden. For years, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a slow collapse. Not a punch, a disintegration. And for the first time in his life, Arnold wasn't the strongest man in the room. He wasn't even the one holding the script. On the sixth day, America got what it didn't know it had been waiting for. At exactly 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the CNN feed cut to an unannounced special. No graphics, no music, just a wide shot of a dimly lit studio and a single chair in the center. Then, as if stepping out of the silence itself, Maria Shriver walked in. No makeup, no notes, no legal team. She sat, adjusted the mic herself, and looked directly into the camera. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. The nation, it seemed, held its breath with her. Then she began. "I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't hiding. And I'm not broken." She said it like a headline. Short, precise, final. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She explained that she had left on her own terms, from her own hotel room, with her own plan. She explained that she had shut off the hallway cameras herself, using access she'd requested weeks prior under guise of increased security protocols. She explained everything calmly, methodically, without apology. But what she said Next was what rewrote the story. I didn't leave because of the affair. I knew about her. I knew about the room. I knew about the child. I knew for a very long time. She paused. I left because he didn't. She didn't name Mildred. She didn't speak of betrayal with venom. Her words were delivered like a report, but the effect was devastating. She described the years of performance, the speeches she helped edit, the campaign she propped up. She said, I wrote lines I never believed in because I thought I was protecting a legacy, but the only thing I was protecting was silence. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the original draft of the statement Arnold planned to give tonight, the one that was going to launch his campaign. I know because I wrote it. She unfolded it, looked at it for a moment, then said aside without reading, I won't read it, because it was never his. It was mine. And just like that, the myth shifted again. The man who had stood in front of podiums his entire life now stood revealed as a man reading scripts written to protect a person he never fully saw. Maria's message wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Her voice wasn't angry. It was forensic. She said she left because she wanted to know what he would become when there was no one left to edit his life. And when she watched the press conference and saw him say nothing, she said she finally had her answer. I disappeared to see what would rise from the silence. And it wasn't him. By the end of the 22-minute broadcast, there was no call to action, no political statement, no vindictive closure, just a quiet goodbye. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to watch what happens next. And then she stood and left. No applause, no fade out, just a return to the anchored desk, stunned and quiet. In the hours that followed, everything changed. Campaign donors pulled out. Endorsements were rescinded. Editorials flipped from wait and see to resign and reflect. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from the public. Not outrage, not celebration, but silence. For once, the country stopped talking because they understood. She hadn't just walked away from a man. She had walked away from a myth. And she had done it not with scandal, but with structure. Not with screaming, but with surgical precision. And now, the only sound left was the echo of everything Arnold didn't say. The house in Hidden Hills had never felt so quiet. The driveway, once filled with staff, security, and press vans, now stood empty. Inside, Arnold sat alone at the long dining table, a place once crowded with family, now lit by a single lamp in the far corner. He hadn't spoken publicly since Maria's appearance. There was nothing left to clarify. No myth left to defend. On the third night after a broadcast, an envelope arrived. No postage, just his name, handwritten in ink he recognized instantly. Maria's handwriting was unmistakable, precise, slanted slightly left, always consistent. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no closing. I watched you become everything the world needed, but not once did you ask what I needed. And in protecting what you built, I erased what I was. You didn't steal anything from me. I gave it up, believing I was part of something greater. But it was only greater because I stayed invisible. The page ended there. Arnold folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer beside him, then just sat still. Outside, the garden lights flickered on automatically at 6:35 p.m., as they always had. Perfectly timed by Maria years ago. The system she'd set up still worked. The world she managed still functioned. She was gone, but her design remained. That night, Arnold didn't sleep. He walked the halls slowly, passing framed photos he hadn't looked at in years. In one, Maria held their youngest child on her hip, sunlight streaming through a window behind her. She wasn't smiling at the camera. She was looking at him. He stared at it for a long time, then turned the frame to face the wall. The next morning, an old friend arrived unannounced. They sat outside, drinking coffee in silence. Then the friend asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" Arnold didn't answer right away. He watched a squirrel dart along the fence line, then looked down at his cup. "I regret not seeing her." "She was right in front of you," the friend said. "That's what I mean," Arnold replied. No one pressed further. Later that day, Arnold opened a drawer at his office and pulled out a speech he'd once rehearsed but never delivered. A draft Maria had marked up years ago with pencil notes in the margins. In the final paragraph, she crossed out one sentence and written instead, "Say something true, even if you lose them." He read that line again and again. Then he placed the paper back and shut the drawer. Outside, reporters still waited at the gates. But the story had moved on. The country no longer needed a scandal. It had already chosen its narrative. He wasn't the villain. He wasn't the victim. He was something far more ordinary, a man who mistook control for care, who confused silence with stability, who couldn't recognize love when it was offered without applause. There would be no press conference, no interview, no documentary, only the quiet. And somewhere beyond the headlines, Maria was still watching, not as an ex-wife, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had finally heard herself speak louder than him. 3 weeks after Maria's broadcast, a book appeared on shelves without warning. No press tour, no pre-orders, no interviews, just a plain black cover with 4 white words, printed without flourish. What I chose to see. The author was listed simply as Maria S. Inside were no chapters, no dramatic storytelling, no expose, just entries, notes, paragraphs without chronology, fragments of years, private margins turned public. There was no mention of Arnold by name, but the story was unmistakable. She wrote about a house with high ceilings and no echoes, a family with daily schedules but no real conversations, a man who never yelled, but whose silence felt like a locked room she wasn't allowed to open. She wrote about smiling for photographers while knowing the child in the background wasn't hers. She described the moment she realized she had become the footnote to someone else's legacy. Then came the lines that would be quoted across the country. I didn't keep quiet because I was weak. I kept quiet because that was the only way to stay close to the sound of my own thoughts. And when the silence stopped protecting me, I knew it was time to speak louder than him. The response was seismic. Overnight, the book sold out in major cities. Commentators on both sides of the political divide called it restrained, brutal, honest. But within hours of its release, another wave hit, one Maria hadn't initiated. A document leaked. It was a scanned page from a meeting note, dated in 1999. It outlined a campaign image strategy, and in the corner, scribbled in red ink, was a note allegedly from a political consultant. Maintain family optics at all costs. If personal matters arise, bury them. She understands the stakes. The media traced the handwriting back to a now retired strategist. He confirmed the note was real. But then he said something else. Maria was in the room. She read it, and she nodded. The twist landed hard. Maria hadn't just endured the lie. For a time, she had helped protect it. The story shifted again. Some accused her of complicity. Others said she had no choice, that silence was the only language women in her position were ever allowed to speak. But one sentence in her book stood out more sharply now. Sometimes the only way to survive inside the system is to become fluent in its lies, until you're ready to translate them into truth. Arnold, for his part, said nothing. He was seen at a charity event a week later, thinner, quieter, his voice almost hoarse. When asked about the book, he responded only with a nod and walked away. At a symposium in New York, a journalist quoted Maria's line to a panelist and asked, "Is this about feminism or power?" The panelist replied, "It's about silence and who gets to end it." The narrative had evolved beyond one marriage. It had become a mirror held up to every institution that had ever rewarded image over integrity. And still, Maria gave no interviews. She had already said enough. The power of the story now belonged to those who read it and decided whether they recognized themselves in its pages. In the fall of 2003, Arnold walked onto another stage. But this time, there were no bright spotlights, no orchestra, no dramatic pauses, just a small wooden platform in the corner of a community hall in Sacramento. His voice was lower, slower. The applause was polite, not thunderous. His campaign for public office had resumed, but not as the chosen savior of California. He was now just another man asking to be heard. Maria wasn't there. When asked why she hadn't joined him on stage, Arnold said nothing. He smiled faintly, then turned to shake hands with a local teacher. The cameras captured it all, but no one asked again. They already knew the answer. Later that evening, Arnold returned to his home. Alone, in his study, he opened a drawer and pulled out a photo, faded, edges worn. It showed Maria laughing in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, hands buried in flour. She wasn't posing. She didn't know she was being photographed. He stared at it for a long time, then carefully slid it into a plain envelope and sealed it. The next day, Maria gave a short speech at a university forum. She never mentioned Arnold, never referenced the book. But at the end, a student asked, "Do you still believe in redemption?" She paused and said softly, "Yes, but it has to come without applause." The room fell silent. That night, a blog post from a young political journalist went viral. It read, "They weren't a scandal. They were a mirror. And in their reflection, we saw who really controls the narrative and who finally, after years of silence, reclaimed it." There would be no reunion, no final confrontation, just distance. And yet, in that distance, something honest had finally appeared. Arnold, once the voice of strength, had been outlasted by the quiet. Maria, once the echo behind a man, had become the author of a silence. Neither won, but neither lied, and that, for once, was enough.